Part 1. The Garden Party at Meadowbrook. The afternoon sun cast dappled shadows through the ancient oak trees of Meadowbrook House, where the annual summer garden party was in full swing. St. Mary Mead had turned out in force, as it always did for Mrs. Bantry's charitable events, and the lawn buzzed with the pleasant hum of genteel conversation, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. Miss Jane Marple sat in her customary chair beneath the wisteria arbour, her knitting needles clicking with practised rhythm, as she observed the gathering with eyes that missed very little. She had positioned herself, quite deliberately, where she could see both the refreshment tent and the main lawn, without appearing to watch anything in particular. "More tea, Miss Marple?" young Griselda Clement asked, hovering with a pot. "How kind, my dear," Miss Marple replied, extending her cup. "What a lovely turnout! Mrs. Bantry must be so pleased." "Indeed she is," Griselda said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Though I did hear her say earlier that Mr. Hargreaves was late with the meat delivery for the buffet. Apparently there was quite a to-do in the kitchen." Miss Marple's needles paused for the briefest moment. "Mr. Hargreaves, but he's usually so punctual." That's what Mrs. Bantry said. She sent young Tommy to fetch him personally, and when they finally arrived, Mr. Hargreaves looked quite peculiar, white as a sheet, according to cook. Before Miss Marple could respond, a commotion near the house drew everyone's attention. Colonel Melchett, the chief constable, was striding across the lawn with unusual urgency, his face set in grim lines. Behind him, Sergeant Brick struggled to keep pace. "Mrs. Bantry," the colonel called out, his voice cutting through the garden party chatter like a knife. "I need a word, privately." The pleasant hum died away. Mrs. Bantry, resplendent in lavender silk, hurried toward him with obvious concern. They spoke in low tones for a moment, and Miss Marple noted how Mrs. Bantry's hand flew to her throat, her face draining of colour. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Bantry announced, her voice only slightly trembling, "I'm afraid I must ask you all to remain here for a short while. There's been an incident." The garden erupted in startled murmurs. Miss Marple set down her knitting and rose with surprising agility for a woman of her years. "An incident?" Miss Hartnell boomed from near the refreshment tent. "What sort of incident?" Colonel Melchett cleared his throat. "I regret to inform you that Mr. Edmund Hargreaves, the butcher, has been found dead in his shop under suspicious circumstances." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Miss Marple observed the reactions carefully, shock, horror, disbelief, and on one face she noted with interest something that might have been relief quickly masked by appropriate concern. "Dead?" squeaked Miss Weatherby, clutching her companion's arm. "But he delivered the meat not 2 hours ago." "Indeed," said Colonel Melchett heavily, "which is why I must ask everyone who was present when Mr. Hargreaves made his delivery to come forward." Several hands rose hesitantly. Miss Marple counted them. Mrs. Bantry herself, naturally. Tommy Atkins, the gardener's son who had fetched the butcher. Cook and 2 kitchen maids. And rather surprisingly, Dr. Haydock, who had apparently been in the kitchen catching an early taste of the salmon mousse. "Now see here, Melchett," Dr. Haydock said, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who had delivered half the village into the world. "I examined Hargreaves when the boy came to fetch me. The man's been dead less than 3 hours, I'd say. Blow to the head, quite deliberate. This is murder, no mistake about it." The word murder sent a fresh wave of shocked exclamations through the crowd. Mrs. Price Ridley actually swayed and had to be supported by her unfortunate companion. Miss Marple moved quietly to where Griselda Clement stood, wide-eyed with shock. "My dear," she said gently, You mentioned that Mr. Hargreaves looked peculiar when he arrived. In what way exactly? Griselda blinked, clearly trying to remember. Well, Cook said he was white and shaking. She thought perhaps he was ill. But there was something else. She frowned. Cook said his apron was on backward. She remarked on it because Mr. Hargreaves is always so particular about his appearance. Proud as a peacock, she called him. How very interesting, Miss Marple murmured. Colonel Melchett was organizing the witnesses near the house, his stentorian voice carrying across the lawn. Now then, I want statements from everyone who saw or spoke to Hargreaves today. The rest of you may go, but please make yourselves available for questioning tomorrow if needed. As the crowd began to disperse in agitated clusters, Miss Marple noticed several things simultaneously. First, that Mr. Lawrence Blake, the newcomer who had taken Rose Cottage last spring, was edging toward the garden gate with marked haste. Second, that Miss Cordelia Spence, the postmistress, was watching Blake's departure with an expression of grim satisfaction. And third, that young Tommy Atkins, who had fetched the butcher, was hovering near the refreshment tent with the guilty look of a boy who knows more than he's telling. A dreadful business, said a voice at her elbow. Raymond West, her nephew, had appeared with his wife Joan. You'll be dragged into this, I suppose, Aunt Jane. You always are. Miss Marple smiled faintly. My dear boy, I'm merely an old woman who happened to be at a garden party. I'm sure Colonel Melchett has everything well in hand. But even as she spoke, her keen mind was already turning over the curious details. An apron worn backward. A man white with fear delivering meat he was known to be proud of. And now, murder. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned long ago, nothing was ever quite as simple as it seemed. People were, in essence, very much alike everywhere, and she had seen their counterparts many times before. The question was not whether there were secrets in the village. There were always secrets. The question was which secret had proved deadly enough to kill for. As she gathered her knitting and prepared to leave Meadowbrook House, Miss Marple cast one more thoughtful glance at the dispersing guests. Somewhere among these familiar faces was a murderer who thought themselves very clever. They had clearly never encountered Miss Jane Marple before. Part 2. Whispers in the High Street. The following morning dawned grey and close, with heavy clouds threatening rain that refused to fall. Miss Marple walked slowly along the High Street, her string shopping bag over her arm, ostensibly on her way to purchase wool from Miss Weatherby's shop. In reality, she was observing the village's reaction to yesterday's shocking events. St. Mary Mead was alive with speculation. Outside the baker's, Mrs. Price Ridley held court with her usual imperious manner. I always said there was something unsavory about that man, she declared, her substantial bosom quivering with indignation. A butcher rising above his station, if you ask me. Did you see that motor car he purchased last year? Quite unnecessary for a tradesman. Her companion, the mousy Miss Hartnell, nodded vigorously. And the way he spoke to customers, as though he were doing them a favour by selling them chops. Miss Marple paused to admire the baker's window display, positioning herself to hear more clearly. Nevertheless, interjected Dr. Haydock, who had emerged from the chemist's next door, the man didn't deserve to have his skull bashed in. Someone entered his shop yesterday morning and killed him in cold blood. That's the long and short of it. But who would do such a thing? Mrs. Price Ridley demanded. The doctor shrugged. Melchett's interviewing half the village. Apparently, Hargreaves had an appointment book that's gone missing. Rather suspicious, that. Miss Marple filed this information away and continued her progress along the street. The butcher's shop itself was closed, its windows dark, a policeman standing guard at the door. Sergeant Brick, she noted, looking rather important with his responsibilities. As she approached, the shop door opened and Colonel Melchett emerged, his expression thunderous. Behind him came a tall, elegant man Miss Marple recognized as Lawrence Blake, the newcomer to Rose Cottage. Blake's handsome face was flushed, his jaw set in angry lines. "This is outrageous, Colonel," Blake was saying. "I've told you already, I barely knew the man. I bought meat from him twice, perhaps 3 times. That hardly constitutes a relationship worth murdering over." "Nevertheless, Mr. Blake," Melchett replied stiffly, "you were seen having a heated argument with Hargreaves 3 days ago, behind the shop where you thought no one could observe you. That requires explanation." Blake's flush deepened. "A private, business matter, nothing more." "Then you won't object to explaining the nature of this business?" "I most certainly will object. It has nothing to do with his death." The 2 men stood at an impasse. Miss Marple bent to examine her shoe, apparently having found a pebble troublesome, and listened intently. "Mr. Blake," Colonel Melchett said with deliberate patience, "a man has been murdered. If you have information relevant to his activities, you must share it. Otherwise, I'm afraid you place yourself in a rather awkward position." Blake's jaw worked. "Very well," he said finally, his voice low. "Hargreaves was blackmailing me. There! Are you satisfied?" The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Miss Marple straightened slowly, her face carefully composed in an expression of vague benevolence. "Blackmail?" Melchett's eyebrows rose. "Over what matter?" "That, Colonel, is absolutely none of your business, unless you can prove it has bearing on his death. Which it does not, because I was in Exeter all day yesterday, as my hotel receipts will prove. Now, if you'll excuse me." Blake strode away, his shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. Colonel Melchett watched him go, then caught sight of Miss Marple. "Ah, Miss Marple! Good morning. Dreadful business, this." "Indeed, Colonel. Most distressing." She paused delicately. "I couldn't help overhearing. Blackmail, you say?" Melchett looked uncomfortable. Shouldn't have said that in the street. But yes. It appears our Mr. Hargreaves was supplementing his income in a most unsavoury manner. We found a locked cash box hidden in his cold room, nearly £300 in it, and various letters and documents. Nasty business." "Dear me," Miss Marple murmured. "How very unpleasant. I suppose several people might have had reason to wish him silent. Precisely my thought. The trouble is determining which of them actually did for him." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Marple. Try not to get too involved in this one, eh? Leave it to the professionals." As the Colonel departed, Miss Marple continued toward the wool shop, her mind working rapidly. Blackmail! That changed everything. It suggested multiple potential suspects, each with their own desperate secret to protect. Inside Miss Weatherby's establishment, she found the postmistress, Cordelia Spence, examining a skein of blue yarn with unusual intensity. The woman's hands trembled slightly. "Good morning, Miss Spence," Miss Marple said pleasantly. "How lovely to see you. Are you undertaking a new project?" Cordelia Spence started violently, dropping the yarn. "Oh, Miss Marple, yes, that is no. I was merely, that is to say," she trailed off miserably. "Perhaps you're feeling unwell," Miss Marple suggested gently. "Yesterday's events were such a shock to us all." "Yes," Cordelia seized on this gratefully. "Such a shock. Poor Mr. Hargreaves, though—" She bit her lip. "Though," Miss Marple prompted. The postmistress looked around to ensure they were alone, then leaned closer. I shouldn't speak ill of the dead, but Mr. Hargreaves was not a nice man, Miss Marple. Not nice at all. He knew things about people, private things, and he used that knowledge in cruel ways. How distressing, Miss Marple said. Did he know things about you, my dear? Cordelia's face went white, then red. I really must go, she stammered, and fled the shop without purchasing anything. Miss Marple selected her wool with care, paid Miss Weatherby, and emerged into the street once more. The pattern was beginning to form, like a picture emerging through morning mist. A blackmailer murdered, multiple suspects with secrets to hide, and somewhere in this tangle of fear and desperation, a killer who believed they had been clever enough to escape justice. But as Miss Marple well knew from long observation of human nature, murderers were rarely as clever as they believed themselves to be. They made mistakes, small ones usually, but mistakes nonetheless. She would simply have to watch, listen, and wait for those mistakes to reveal themselves. Part 3. Tea and Revelations. Miss Marple's sitting room at Danemead Cottage was a testament to comfortable gentility. Chintz curtains framing mullioned windows, family photographs in silver frames, and her beloved garden visible through French doors that stood open to admit the afternoon breeze. The threatened rain had finally arrived in the night and departed by dawn, leaving everything fresh and green. She had invited Griselda Clement for tea, ostensibly to discuss the flower arrangement for Sunday's church service, but in reality to gather more information about the late Mr. Hargreaves. Griselda, as the vicar's wife, heard a great deal of village gossip, though her kind heart often prevented her from repeating it. "Sugar, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, pouring from her second-best teapot. "Just one, thank you." Griselda accepted the cup, but her usual vivacity was dimmed. "I can't stop thinking about it, Miss Marple. Murder in St. Mary Mead. Leonard is quite distraught. He says we must pray for the killer's soul as much as for poor Mr. Hargreaves, but I confess I'm finding that rather difficult." "Your husband is quite right, of course," Miss Marple said mildly, "though I suspect Mr. Hargreaves's soul may require rather more prayers than most. I've been hearing some disturbing things about his character." Griselda leaned forward, lowering her voice despite their privacy. "You've heard about the blackmail, then? It's all over the village. Mrs. Bantry told me in strictest confidence, which means she told at least 6 other people as well, that Colonel Melchett found evidence that Mr. Hargreaves had been extorting money from several villagers. How very distressing. I don't suppose anyone knows who these unfortunate victims were." Griselda hesitated, her conscience clearly warring with her curiosity. "Well, Mr. Blake admitted it openly, so that's hardly a secret, and I did hear." She paused, then continued in a rush. "Miss Marple, I saw something the day before the murder. I wasn't sure whether to tell the Colonel or not." Miss Marple set down her teacup with careful precision. "My dear child, if you have information relevant to a murder investigation, you must certainly tell Colonel Melchett. But perhaps you might tell me first. Sometimes talking things through with a friend helps clarify one's thoughts." "That's what I hoped." Griselda drew a deep breath. "I was walking past the butcher's shop on Tuesday evening, quite late. I'd been visiting old Mrs. Carmichael, who's been poorly. The shop was closed, but I saw a light in the back room. Then the door opened, and Mrs. Carmody came out." "Mrs. Carmody?" Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "The doctor's widow was one of St. Mary Mead's most respected residents, always perfectly turned out, always first to volunteer for charitable causes. Are you quite certain? Absolutely. She didn't see me. I was in the shadow of the greengrocer's awning, but I recognized her coat, that distinctive Persian lamb. She looked furtive, kept glancing around as though afraid of being observed. Then she hurried away toward the church lane. How very interesting, Miss Marple murmured. And what time was this? Nearly 8 o'clock. The shop closes at 6 on Tuesdays. So she had some reason to meet Mr. Hargreaves privately after hours. Miss Marple poured more tea, her mind working rapidly. Mrs. Carmody always seems so above reproach. One wonders what secret she might wish to keep hidden. That's just it, Griselda said miserably. I can't imagine Mrs. Carmody doing anything wrong. She's been so kind to us since we arrived in the village. But why else would she meet the butcher secretly? Unless... Her eyes widened. Miss Marple, you don't think she and Mr. Hargreaves were having a romantic liaison? Miss Marple shook her head. No, my dear. I think it far more likely that she, too, was one of his victims. Though what he could possibly have held over such a respectable woman, I cannot imagine. The sound of voices in the garden interrupted them. Through the French doors, Miss Marple observed her nephew Raymond approaching with young Tommy Atkins in tow. The gardener's son looked thoroughly miserable, his cap twisted between work-roughened hands. Aunt Jane, Raymond called. I've brought someone to see you. Tommy here has been working himself into a state, and I thought you might help him sort things out. How thoughtful of you, Raymond. Do come in, both of you. Tommy, you look as though you could use some refreshment. Mrs. Griselda, would you be so kind as to fetch some of that ginger cake from the kitchen? When they were all settled, Miss Marple turned her gentle gaze upon the boy. He was perhaps 17 with the awkward angularity of youth, and eyes that couldn't quite meet hers. Now then, Tommy, she said kindly, something is troubling you. Is it about Mr. Hargreaves? The boy's face crumpled. I should have told the Colonel straight away, Miss Marple, but I was afraid. Mr. Hargreaves, he wasn't a good man. So I have been learning. What did you see, Tommy? When Mrs. Bantry sent me to fetch him for the delivery, I went to the shop first. It was locked, but I could hear voices inside. Angry voices. Mr. Hargreaves and a woman. She was crying, begging him for something. He laughed, such a nasty laugh, and said she'd have to pay more if she wanted her secret kept. Could you identify the woman's voice? Tommy shook his head. It was muffled, but then I heard something crash, like furniture being knocked over. I got frightened and ran around to knock on the back door. That's when Mr. Hargreaves came out, looking all peculiar like Cook said, white and shaking. His apron was all askew. And was the woman still inside? I don't know, miss. He locked the door behind him, quick-like, and told me to mind my own business. Then he followed me back to Meadowbrook House to make the delivery. Miss Marple absorbed this information carefully. Tommy, did you tell anyone else about this? No, miss. I was afraid I'd get in trouble for eavesdropping. But now he's dead, and I keep thinking, what if that woman killed him? What if I could have prevented it? My dear boy, Miss Marple said firmly, you could not have known what would happen. But you must tell Colonel Melchett immediately. This is important evidence. After Tommy left, looking slightly relieved of his burden, Miss Marple sat in thoughtful silence. Griselda watched her with barely suppressed curiosity. 2 women, Miss Marple finally said. Mrs. Carmody, visiting secretly on Tuesday evening, and an unknown woman arguing with him Wednesday morning, just before he was killed. I think, my dear Griselda, that we need to discover what secrets Mr. Hargreaves was trading in. secrets valuable enough to kill for. Part 4. The Missing Ledger. The incident room at the police station was cramped and overheated, made more so by Colonel Melchert's rising temper. Miss Marple had been summoned, quite unofficially, by Dr. Haydock, who felt that the investigation was becoming unnecessarily complicated and could benefit from her particular insight into village psychology. "The problem," Melchert was saying, pacing before a corkboard covered with notes and photographs, "is that we have too many suspects and not enough concrete evidence. Hargreaves was blackmailing at least 4 people that we know of, possibly more. Any one of them could have killed him." 5, corrected Inspector Slack, who had been called in from Much Benham to assist. He was a sharp-featured man with an unfortunate tendency to jump to conclusions. "That Carmody woman admitted she was being blackmailed when we questioned her this morning. Broke down completely." Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively in the corner with her knitting, looked up with interest. "Mrs. Carmody confessed. How distressing for her. May one ask what hold Mr. Hargreaves had over her?" Melchert hesitated, then sighed. "I suppose it'll be all over the village soon enough anyway. Her late husband's death wasn't quite as natural as everyone believed. Dr. Carmody had been slowly poisoning himself with laudanum. Accidental overdose, officially. But he left a letter suggesting it might have been intentional. Mrs. Carmody found it and destroyed it to protect his reputation and prevent a scandal. Somehow, Hargreaves got hold of a copy. How perfectly dreadful, Miss Marple murmured. The poor woman. And naturally, she feared that if the truth emerged, her husband would be denied Christian burial, and her own position in society would be ruined. Precisely. She'd been paying Hargreaves £20 quarterly for the past 2 years. Melchert shook his head. But she has an alibi for Wednesday morning. She was conducting a meeting of the Ladies' Aid Society in the church hall from 9 until noon. 12 witnesses. "What about Blake?" Slack demanded. "He admits to being blackmailed, and his alibi is just a hotel receipt. Those can be forged." "Blake's situation is more delicate," Melchert said uncomfortably. "He's the younger son of Lord Egerton. Came here to escape some scandal in London. Hargreaves discovered that Blake had been involved in a gambling scheme that nearly ruined his elder brother. Nothing criminal precisely, but enough to destroy what's left of the family's reputation. Blake has a temper, and he had opportunity. His supposed trip to Exeter wasn't until the afternoon train." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "Has anyone investigated Mr. Hargreaves's background? One wonders how a village butcher acquired such a talent for uncovering secrets." Dr. Haydock snorted. "That's the strangest part. I did some checking with a medical colleague in Dorchester. Edmund Hargreaves wasn't always a butcher. 20 years ago, he was a clerk in a solicitor's office, handling confidential estate matters, wills, that sort of thing. He was dismissed for reading private correspondence and selling information to interested parties. Blackmail, essentially, even then. So he came here and established himself as a respectable tradesman," Miss Marple said thoughtfully. "But old habits die hard. The butcher's shop would have been perfect for his purposes. Everyone in the village comes to buy meat, and people chat while they wait. He could observe, listen, piece together information." "There's something else," Melchert said. "We found a ledger hidden in his shop. A record of his blackmail victims and what he had on each of them. But it's in some kind of code. Numbers and initials. Nothing we can definitely connect to actual people. And more importantly, the pages for the last 3 months have been torn out. Someone removed them. Either Hargreaves himself or his killer." Inspector Slack leaned forward eagerly. "The killer took them to hide their identity, it's obvious." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said gently. Or perhaps Mr. Hargreaves removed them himself for safekeeping. After all, if his more recent victims were paying regularly, he would want to protect that income. May I see the ledger? Melchett handed it over. Miss Marple examined it carefully, running her fingers over the torn edges. How interesting! These pages weren't torn out hastily. See how clean the edges are? They were removed carefully, probably with a knife, and recently the paper hasn't yellowed. And look here, there's an indentation on the remaining page. Someone wrote on the removed page, and the pressure left a mark. Slack grabbed the ledger and held it to the light. By God, you're right. It looks like numbers, a date maybe. Or an address, Miss Marple suggested. A house number perhaps, followed by letters. If one were to rub a pencil gently over the indentation. Dr. Haydock produced a pencil, and Slack carefully shaded the area. Gradually, numbers and letters emerged. 17 CH. 17 Church Lane, Melchett said immediately. That's the Spence cottage, Miss Marple finished quietly. Where Miss Cordelia Spence lives, the postmistress. A heavy silence fell over the room. Cordelia Spence, with her nervous manner and trembling hands. Cordelia Spence, who had fled Miss Weatherby's shop when questioned about Hargreaves. Right, Slack said, standing abruptly. We'll bring her in for questioning immediately. Perhaps, Miss Marple interjected softly, it might be more productive to discover what secret Miss Spence was hiding before you confront her directly. She's a sensitive soul, easily frightened. If you approach too aggressively, she may simply collapse rather than provide useful information. Melchett frowned. What do you suggest? The post office, Miss Marple said simply. Miss Spence has worked there for 30 years. If Mr. Hargreaves discovered something about her through his observations, it likely relates to her position. And there's one person who might know more about Miss Spence's history than anyone else in the village. Who? Demanded Slack. Mrs. Bantry. She's been here longer than anyone, and she knew Miss Spence's family before the war. Perhaps a quiet word over tea might prove more illuminating than a formal interrogation. Melchett considered this, then nodded slowly. Very well, Miss Marple. You have a way of getting people to talk. See what you can discover, but, he added sternly, if you uncover anything relevant to the murder, you must tell me immediately. No amateur heroics. Naturally, Colonel, Miss Marple said, gathering her knitting. I should hate to interfere with official police business. I'll simply have a little chat with dear Mrs. Bantry. What could be more innocent than that? As she left the station, Miss Marple's expression was thoughtful. The mystery was deepening, layers upon layers of secrets carefully maintained for years. But somewhere in this tangle lay the truth. And she was determined to uncover it, even if that truth proved more disturbing than anyone in St. Mary Mead could imagine. Part 5. Secrets of the Past. Meadowbrook House sat serene in the afternoon light, its Georgian facade gleaming after the rain. Mrs. Bantry received Miss Marple in the morning room, a cheerful space decorated in yellow and white, with windows overlooking the rose garden where the ill-fated party had taken place just 2 days earlier. Jane, how lovely, Mrs. Bantry said, though her smile was strained. I've been simply desperate for sensible company. Everyone else either wants to gossip dreadfully or pretend nothing has happened at all. Colonel Arthur keeps muttering about moving to Devon, as though murder was somehow contagious. Murder does tend to disturb one's equilibrium, Miss Marple agreed, settling into a wing chair. Though I must say, St. Mary Mead is handling the shock rather better than some places might. Mrs. Bantry poured tea with hands that trembled only slightly. The Colonel told Arthur about the blackmail. It's too awful, Jane. To think that man was sitting in everyone's kitchens, smiling and wrapping chops. all the while collecting our secrets like some ghastly spider. Spiders are actually quite beneficial creatures, Miss Marple observed mildly. But yes, I take your meaning. Dolly, you've lived here longer than anyone. You must have known the Spence family before Cordelia took over the post office. Mrs. Bantry's cup rattled against its saucer. The Spences? Why on earth are you asking about them? No particular reason. I merely happened to think of them. Miss Marple's tone was deliberately casual. Cordelia seems so very nervous lately. I wondered if the murder had distressed her more than most. Cordelia is always nervous, Mrs. Bantry said, but her eyes had taken on a distant, troubled look. She has been ever since the unfortunate business with her sister. Miss Marple leaned forward with interest. I didn't know she had a sister. Most people don't. It was all hushed up very thoroughly. Mrs. Bantry set down her cup and moved to the window, her back to Miss Marple. This was in 1920, just after the war. Cordelia had a younger sister, Margaret. Lovely girl, quite beautiful, really. She became engaged to a young officer from Much Benham, James Hartley. Very suitable match. Everyone was delighted. She paused, her fingers pleating the curtain fabric. 3 weeks before the wedding, Margaret disappeared, simply vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. There was a tremendous scandal. People whispered that she'd run off with another man, that she'd been secretly pregnant, all sorts of dreadful things. The Hartley family was mortified. They left the area entirely. How terrible, Miss Marple murmured. Was Margaret ever found? Never. The police searched everywhere, dragged the river, questioned everyone who'd seen her. Nothing. Old Mr. Spence, Cordelia's father, died of a baby heart attack 6 months later. Everyone said it was the shame that killed him. Cordelia took over the post office and has been there ever since, living with the whispers and the questions. And what do you believe happened to Margaret? Mrs. Bantry turned, her face troubled. I think she's dead, Jane. I think she's been dead for 25 years. Margaret wasn't the sort of girl to run away. She adored James Hartley, was planning her wedding with such joy. If she'd wanted to leave, she would have done it openly, not skulked away in the night. No, something happened to her. Did anyone ever suspect foul play? The police considered it, but there was no evidence, no body, nothing stolen. Her bedroom window was open, her nightgown left behind. It was as if she'd simply evaporated. Mrs. Bantry returned to her seat, her voice dropping. There were rumours, though. James Hartley had a violent temper. Some people whispered that he'd found out something about Margaret, another man perhaps, and done something terrible. But he had an alibi, was at his parents' house all night. Besides, why would he kill her when he could simply have broken the engagement? Miss Marple's mind worked rapidly, piecing together implications. And Cordelia has lived under this cloud ever since. How dreadful for her. She's never been the same. Used to be quite lively, you know. Now she jumps at shadows. Mrs. Bantry hesitated. Jane, why are you asking about this? Surely you don't think it has anything to do with Hargreaves's murder. I'm not certain, Miss Marple admitted, but Mr. Hargreaves was a man who specialized in uncovering old secrets. And there's something about the timing that troubles me. Tommy Atkins heard a woman arguing with Hargreaves the morning of the murder, begging him about a secret. Cordelia's address was in his ledger. Mrs. Bantry's face paled. You think Cordelia killed him, but she couldn't. She's such a timid creature. She'd faint at the sight of blood. People are capable of surprising things when desperate, Miss Marple said gently. Though I'm not saying Cordelia is guilty. I'm merely trying to understand what hold Hargreaves might have had over her. What secret could be so terrible that she would pay to keep it hidden after 25 years? Unless, Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, unless Hargreaves had discovered what really happened to Margaret. Jane, what if Cordelia knows where her sister is? What if she's always known? The implication hung between them, heavy with dreadful possibility. Before Miss Marple could respond, the door burst open and Colonel Bantry strode in, his face grim. "Dolly, Miss Marple, there's been a development. Inspector Slack has just arrested Cordelia Spence for the murder of Edmund Hargreaves. Claims she's confessed to everything." Mrs. Bantry gasped. Miss Marple rose slowly, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked. "Has she indeed? How very convenient. Colonel Bantry, would it be possible for me to speak with Miss Spence? I think there may be more to this confession than meets the eye." "Slack won't like it," Colonel Bantry warned. "He's convinced he's got his killer." "Yes," Miss Marple said quietly. "That's precisely what concerns me. Inspector Slack is an efficient officer, but he does tend to see what he expects to see, rather than what is actually there. And I suspect that Miss Spence's confession may be hiding a truth far more complex and far more tragic than simple murder." She gathered her belongings with quiet determination. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, shadows lengthening across the rose garden. Somewhere in those shadows lay the answer to a 25-year-old mystery and a 2-day-old murder, and Miss Marple was beginning to see how they might be connected. But the picture was not yet complete, and until it was, she feared that justice, true justice, would remain frustratingly out of reach. Part 6. A False Confession. The police station's interview room was stark and unwelcoming, with whitewashed walls and a single high window that admitted only grudging light. Cordelia Spence sat hunched in a wooden chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She looked smaller somehow, as though the confession had diminished her physically. Inspector Slack stood against the wall, arms folded, wearing an expression of smug satisfaction. Colonel Melchett sat across from Cordelia, his face troubled despite the apparent resolution of the case. Miss Marple entered quietly, carrying a pot of tea she had persuaded the desk sergeant to provide. "Miss Spence, my dear, you look absolutely exhausted. Perhaps some tea would help." Cordelia looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Miss Marple, what are you doing here? The Colonel was kind enough to allow me to visit. We've known each other for so many years, after all." She poured tea with steady hands, adding sugar without asking. 2 lumps, the way Cordelia always took it at church socials. "There now, drink this, and then perhaps you might tell me exactly what happened." "She's already told us what happened," Slack interjected irritably. "Confessed to the whole thing. Hit Hargreaves over the head with a meat mallet, she did. Case closed." "Did you, Cordelia?" Miss Marple asked gently, her eyes never leaving the postmistress's face. Cordelia's lips trembled. Yes, I killed him. It was me." "I see. And why did you kill Mr. Hargreaves?" "Because he was blackmailing me. He knew about—" she faltered, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "He knew about Margaret." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Your sister who disappeared 25 years ago. What exactly did Mr. Hargreaves know?" A long silence stretched between them. Cordelia stared into her teacup as though seeking answers in its depths. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow with old grief. "He knew where she was buried." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Even Slack straightened, his satisfaction faltering. "Buried?" Melchett leaned forward. Are you saying your sister is dead? That she was murdered? She died, Cordelia whispered, the night before she was to be married. I found her in her room. She'd taken something, laudanum, I think. There was a letter beside her saying she couldn't go through with the wedding, that she'd discovered something terrible about James Hartley's family and couldn't bear to become part of it. She begged us to forgive her. Mrs. Bantry's voice came from the doorway, where she had appeared with Dr. Haydock. She killed herself. But why didn't you tell anyone? Cordelia's face crumpled. Because father would have been destroyed. Margaret would have been denied Christian burial, labelled a suicide, damned. And the Hartleys, they would have blamed themselves, or been blamed by others. I couldn't let that happen, so I removed the body, took it to our cottage garden in the middle of the night, and buried it beneath the rose bushes. Then I opened her window and let everyone believe she'd run away. Good God, Melchett breathed. For 25 years you've lived with this? Every single day. Tears streamed down Cordelia's face. Every time someone mentioned her name, every time the Hartley family was spoken of, I lived with the knowledge of what I'd done. And then Hargreaves, he somehow discovered the truth. Perhaps he'd seen something that night. Perhaps he'd noticed the disturbed earth. I don't know how he knew, but he did. He came to me 6 months ago and demanded money. Said he'd tell the police, have Margaret's body exhumed, expose everything. Miss Marple sipped her own tea thoughtfully. And so you paid him? Every penny I could spare, but it was never enough. He wanted more and more. Last week he demanded £50, 50, or he'd go to Colonel Melchett. I didn't have it. I went to the bank in Much Benham, tried to withdraw my savings, but they wouldn't release it all at once. Hargreaves was furious when I told him. That morning he sent word that I must meet him at the shop before it opened, that we would settle accounts one way or another. So you went there, Slack prompted, and you killed him. But Miss Marple was watching Cordelia's face with keen attention. What time did you arrive at the shop, my dear? Just after 8 o'clock. The door was unlocked. I went inside and... She paused, her expression confused. And he was already dead. Lying on the floor behind the counter, blood on his head. I couldn't believe it. I stood there, staring at him, thinking that all of my prayers had been answered. Then I heard voices outside, people coming along the street. I panicked and ran out the back door. Inspector Slack's triumphant expression had faded entirely. You're saying you didn't kill him? I wanted to, Cordelia said miserably. God help me, I wanted him dead. I'd even brought father's old walking stick with me, thinking perhaps I might. But when I saw him lying there, I realized I could never have done it. I'm too much of a coward. Miss Marple set down her teacup with a decisive click. Then why, my dear, did you confess to a murder you didn't commit? Cordelia looked at her with desperate, hollow eyes. Because when they found the body and started investigating, they would discover Margaret. They would dig up the garden, find her remains, and everyone would know what I'd done. The shame, the scandal, it would all come out anyway. I thought if I confessed to killing Hargreaves, at least Margaret's secret might remain buried. At least she could stay at rest. You were trying to protect your sister even now, Miss Marple said softly, even at the cost of your own freedom. She was all I had, Cordelia whispered, my beautiful little sister. I failed to protect her in life. The least I could do was protect her in death. The room fell silent. Even Slack seemed moved by the tragedy of it, 25 years of guilt and secrecy, ending in a desperate, self-sacrificing lie. Finally, Melchett cleared his throat. Miss Spence, I'm afraid we'll need to verify your story about your sister. The garden will have to be examined." "I know," Cordelia said dully. "I've always known this day would come." Miss Marple rose, gathering her things. "Colonel Melchett, might I have a word in private?" In the corridor outside, she turned to face the Colonel and Dr. Haydock, who had followed them out. Her expression was grave. "Cordelia Spence did not kill Edmund Hargreaves," she said firmly. "But someone did. Someone who knew she would be at the shop that morning, who knew she had motive and opportunity. Someone clever enough to use her desperate situation as cover for their own crime." "But who?" Melchett demanded. "That," Miss Marple said quietly, "is what we must now discover. And I suspect the answer lies not in Cordelia's past, but in someone else's secret, a secret worth killing to protect." Part 7. The Widow's Garden. The excavation of Cordelia Spence's garden began at dawn the following morning, conducted with as much discretion as possible in a village where discretion was virtually impossible. By 9 o'clock, half of St. Mary Mead had found reasons to pass by Church Lane, and the other half was receiving detailed reports by telephone. Miss Marple, however, was elsewhere. She stood in the immaculate garden of Larchwood, the handsome Victorian villa where Mrs. Carmody had lived since her husband's death 3 years ago. The widow herself was serving coffee in the conservatory, her hands steady despite the shadows beneath her eyes. "I'm so grateful you came, Miss Marple," Mrs. Carmody said, her cultured voice only slightly strained. "Everyone else looks at me now with such speculation, as though I might suddenly produce a bloody knife from my handbag. My dear Mrs. Carmody, no one who knows you could possibly believe you capable of violence," Miss Marple assured her, "though I confess I am curious about something. You mentioned that Mr. Hargreaves had been blackmailing you for 2 years. How did he discover your husband's letter?" Mrs. Carmody's composure cracked slightly. "I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. The letter was in my private papers, locked in my desk. The only time it left my possession was—" She paused, her brow furrowing. "There was one occasion. About 2.5 years ago, I'd been organizing my late husband's medical books to donate to the hospital. I'd left the desk unlocked while I worked. Mrs. Beale, my cleaning woman, was here that day. She might have seen the letter, though I can't imagine why she'd have told Hargreaves. Mrs. Beale," Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully. "She also cleans for the Bantrys, doesn't she? And several other households." "Yes, she's quite in demand. Very thorough, if somewhat nosy." Mrs. Carmody set down her cup with a sharp clink. "Miss Marple, surely you don't think Mrs. Beale was somehow working with Hargreaves?" "I think," Miss Marple said carefully, "that information flows through cleaning women just as surely as water flows downhill. They see everything, hear everything, and if they're not particularly scrupulous, they might share everything, for the right price." Mrs. Carmody's face hardened. "You're suggesting Mrs. Beale was spying for that dreadful man? Selling our secrets?" "It's merely a theory. Tell me, have you ever seen Mrs. Beale speaking with Mr. Hargreaves?" "Now that you mention it," Mrs. Carmody's eyes widened. "Yes, I saw them once, about 18 months ago. I'd gone to the butcher's shop for a leg of lamb. Mrs. Beale was there, supposedly ordering mince, but they were standing very close together, speaking in low voices. When I entered, they sprang apart like guilty children. I thought it odd at the time, but dismissed it." Miss Marple nodded slowly, her mind assembling pieces of a puzzle. "Mrs. Carmody, I wonder if you might do me a favor. Could you telephone Mrs. Beale and ask her to come here this afternoon? Tell her you need some extra cleaning done, But don't mention that I'll be here." "Certainly, but why?" "Because," Miss Marple said quietly, "I believe Mrs. Beale may know far more about Mr. Hargreaves's death than anyone has yet realized." At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Beale arrived at Larchwood with her cleaning basket and an expression of studied innocence. She was a stout woman in her 50s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing and a mouth that had perfected the art of looking both servile and calculating. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Beale," Mrs. Carmody said coolly from the drawing-room doorway. "I'm afraid I must speak with you about a rather serious matter. Miss Marple is here as well." Mrs. Beale's face went chalk white. "Miss Marple, I don't understand, ma'am. Have I done something wrong?" "That remains to be seen," Miss Marple said pleasantly, emerging from the conservatory. "Mrs. Beale, perhaps you could tell us about your relationship with the late Mr. Hargreaves." "Relationship? I didn't have no relationship with him. I bought my meat there like everyone else, that's all." "Come now," Miss Marple said, her voice still gentle, but her eyes sharp as flint. "You were seen speaking with him privately on several occasions, and I think you provided him with information about the households where you worked, information he used for blackmail." Mrs. Beale's hands twisted in her apron. "That's a lie! I never—" "The letter about Dr. Carmody's death," Miss Marple continued inexorably. "You saw it when you were cleaning here. You told Mr. Hargreaves, and he used it to extort money from Mrs. Carmody. How much did he pay you for that particular piece of information, Mrs. Beale?" The cleaning woman's face had gone from white to red, sweat beading on her forehead. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "I rather think we can." Dr. Haydock entered, followed by Colonel Melchett. The doctor was carrying a small notebook, which he held up for all to see. "We found this hidden in Hargreaves's shop, tucked inside a hollowed-out ledger book. It's a record of payments made to various informants. Your name appears quite frequently, Mrs. Beale. £5 here, £10 there. Quite a tidy sum over 2 years." Mrs. Beale collapsed into a chair, her face crumpling. "He promised me it was harmless. Just little bits of gossip, he said. Things people wouldn't want known, but nothing really bad. He said we were just keeping tabs on the neighbours, making sure no one was getting too above themselves." "And you believed him?" Mrs. Carmody's voice was ice. "I needed the money," Mrs. Beale cried. "My husband drinks his wages. My daughter's got 3 children and no husband to support them. Hargreaves paid well, and all I had to do was keep my eyes and ears open. I didn't know he was using it for blackmail, not at first. By the time I figured it out, I was in too deep. He said if I stopped helping him, he'd tell everyone I was his accomplice." "So you were trapped," Miss Marple said, not unkindly. "Just as his blackmail victims were trapped. Mrs. Beale, where were you on Wednesday morning between 8 and 9 o'clock?" "Home. I was home, I swear it. My husband can vouch for me. Well, he was sleeping off the drink, but I was there." Melchett stepped forward, his expression stern. "Mrs. Beale, you're going to come to the station and make a full statement about your arrangement with Hargreaves. Every household you spied on, every secret you passed along. Do you understand?" Mrs. Beale nodded miserably, tears streaming down her face. As Melchett led her away, Mrs. Carmody sank into a chair, her composure finally breaking. "That woman was in my home, handling my private things, all while selling my secrets. How many others, Miss Marple? How many other women did she betray?" "I suspect we shall soon find out," Miss Marple said quietly. "But Mrs. Carmody, this doesn't solve our murder. Mrs. Beale may have been Hargreaves's spy, but she wasn't his killer. Someone else entered that shop Wednesday morning and struck him down. Someone with a secret even more desperate than the ones we've already uncovered." Dr. Haydock frowned. "But if Mrs. Beale was his source of information, and we've identified most of his blackmail victims, who else could have a motive?" Miss Marple's expression was troubled. "That, my dear doctor, is precisely what worries me. I'm beginning to suspect that the answer lies not in what Mr. Hargreaves knew, but in what he was about to discover. Something worth killing to prevent." Part 8. The Apprentice's Tale. The Red Lion public house sat at the corner of the High Street and Mill Lane, its ancient timbers and leaded windows a testament to 3 centuries of village life. Inside, the saloon bar was dim and comfortable, smelling of beer, tobacco, and old wood polish. Miss Marple had never entered the establishment in her life, but circumstances, as she had explained to a scandalized Miss Weatherby, sometimes required flexibility. She found the young man she sought sitting alone in a corner booth, nursing a pint of bitter with the air of someone who wished to be left undisturbed. Peter Wickham was perhaps 23, with the solid build of someone accustomed to physical labor, and a face that might have been handsome were it not for the haunted expression in his eyes. "Mr. Wickham," Miss Marple said pleasantly, approaching his table, "I wonder if I might join you for a moment." He looked up, startled. "Miss Marple, this isn't really a place for ladies, begging your pardon." "So I've been told. Nevertheless, I find myself here." She settled onto the bench opposite him with surprising ease. "I believe you were apprenticed to Mr. Hargreaves until quite recently. I should like to speak with you about that." Peter's jaw tightened. "I've got nothing to say about him." "That's rather curious, considering you worked alongside him for 2 years. One would think you'd have formed some opinion of the man." "Oh, I've got opinions," Peter said bitterly. "None of them fit for a lady's ears." Miss Marple folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Wickham, a man has been murdered. If you know something relevant to his death, you have an obligation to share it." He took a long drink of his beer, then set the glass down with a thud. "All right. You want to know about Edmund Hargreaves. He was a bastard. Excuse my language, but there's no other word for it. He treated me like dirt, worked me 12 hours a day for wages that barely kept me fed, and when I asked for a raise after 2 years of hard labor, he laughed in my face." "Is that why you left his employ?" "Partly." Peter's hands clenched into fists on the table. "But mostly it was because I found out what he was really doing. The blackmail, the spying, all of it. I stumbled on his ledger one day when he'd left it out by accident, read enough to make me sick. When I confronted him about it, he threatened me, said if I told anyone, he'd make sure no butcher in the county would ever hire me." "How did you respond to that threat?" Peter met her eyes directly. "I told him to go to hell and walked out. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been doing odd jobs since, trying to save enough to start over somewhere else. And before you ask, yes, I hated him. Yes, I wanted him to pay for what he'd done. But I didn't kill him." "I don't believe you did," Miss Marple said quietly. "But I think you know something that might help identify who did. You worked in that shop for 2 years. You must have observed Mr. Hargreaves's interactions with his customers." Peter laughed harshly. "Observed? I catalogued them. The man was a performer, Miss Marple. With some customers, he was all charm and friendliness. With others, the ones he had something on, he was different, careful, watchful, like a cat playing with a mouse. Can you give me examples?" He considered this. then nodded slowly. Mrs. Carmody, for one. She always came in looking like she was going to the gallows. Hargreaves would smile at her, all politeness, but there was something nasty underneath. And that Blake fellow, the gentleman who took Rose Cottage. First time he came in, they were cordial enough. Second time, Hargreaves made some comment about gambling debts and family honour, and Blake went white as bone. After that, Blake always looked like he wanted to throttle Hargreaves every time he placed an order. Anyone else who seemed particularly uncomfortable around Mr. Hargreaves? Plenty, but... Peter paused, his brow furrowing. There was one thing that struck me as odd. About 2 months ago, this stranger came into the shop, well-dressed man, London accent, driving a fancy motor car. He asked to speak to Hargreaves privately. They went into the back room, and I could hear them arguing. The stranger was saying something about, "You've gone too far this time, and there are limits." Hargreaves laughed and said something like, "You'll pay like all the rest, or everyone will know what you did." Miss Marple leaned forward with interest. "Did you see this man's face?" "Not clearly. He was wearing a hat pulled low, and he kept his back to me mostly. But I noticed his hands, gentleman's hands, soft, with a gold signet ring on the left pinky. And when he left, he was shaking with rage. I remember thinking that if looks could kill, Hargreaves would have dropped dead on the spot. Did Mr. Hargreaves seem concerned after this encounter? That's the strange part. He seemed pleased with himself, almost excited, kept humming as he worked, like he'd just won a prize. But the next week, I noticed he'd become more careful. Started locking the back room even when he was in the shop. Kept looking out the window as if expecting someone. Expecting the stranger to return, perhaps. Maybe. Or expecting trouble. Peter finished his beer and said, the glass aside, "Look, Miss Marple, I don't know who killed Hargreaves, and I can't say I'm sorry he's dead. But I'll tell you this, whoever did it probably saved other people from years of misery. The man was a poison in this village, corrupting everything he touched. Nevertheless," Miss Marple said firmly, "murder is not justice, Mr. Wickham. It is merely another crime added to the first, and I intend to see that the guilty party is brought to account, regardless of how despicable the victim may have been." She rose to leave, then paused. "One more question. Did you ever see Mrs. Beale, the cleaning woman, meeting with Mr. Hargreaves?" Peter's expression darkened. All the time. She'd come by the shop at odd hours, slip in through the back door. I didn't think much of it at first, thought maybe she was buying offcuts cheap. But after I found that ledger, I realized she was his informant, selling out everyone she worked for. Thank you, Mr. Wickham. You've been most helpful." As Miss Marple emerged into the afternoon sunlight, her mind was racing. A mysterious stranger from London, arguing with Hargreaves 2 months ago. A blackmailer who had gone too far this time, and a killer who had struck with precision and forethought, knowing exactly when Cordelia Spence would be at the shop to provide convenient misdirection. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, but the picture was still incomplete. She needed to know who this London stranger was, and what secret was so damning that it had driven someone to murder. Miss Marple turned her steps toward the vicarage, where Griselda Clement kept meticulous records of every motor car that passed through the village. A hobby her husband considered frivolous, but which Miss Marple now suspected might prove invaluable. In a village, nothing went unobserved. One simply had to know where to look. Part 9. The Motor Car Registry. The vicarage study was a cluttered haven of books, parish records, and Griselda Clement's various enthusiasms, which changed seasonally like the vestments in church. Currently, her passion was cataloguing the increasing motor traffic through St. Mary Mead, complete with sketches, license plate numbers, and detailed observations that would have put a police constable to shame. "I know Leonard thinks it's silly," Griselda said, pulling out a leather-bound notebook from a stack on the desk, "but I find it fascinating how modern life is transforming even our little village. 2 months ago, you say? Let me see." She flipped through pages filled with neat handwriting and careful drawings. Ah, here we are, September. There were several unfamiliar motor cars that month. A Bentley from Hampshire. That was the Thornton Bassets visiting the Bantrys. A Morris from London, but that belonged to Raymond West, your nephew. And, oh, this is interesting. Miss Marple peered over her shoulder. "What have you found?" "A Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, registration number LN42782. I noted it, particularly because it was such a magnificent vehicle, and it stopped right outside the butcher's shop. The driver got out and went inside. I remember because I was arranging flowers in the church porch and had a clear view across the street." "Can you describe the driver?" Griselda closed her eyes, concentrating. "Tall, well-built, wearing a Savile Row suit, I could tell by the cut. Dark hair going grey at the temples. Late 40s, perhaps early 50s. He had an air of authority about him, like someone used to being obeyed. And—" her eyes snapped open. "He was wearing a signet ring. I noticed because it caught the sunlight when he reached for the shop door. Gold, with some sort of crest engraved on it. Did you see him leave?" "Yes. He emerged about 20 minutes later, looking absolutely furious. His face was red, and he was practically vibrating with anger. He got into his motor car and drove off rather recklessly, scattering gravel. I nearly went to speak to him about his driving, but Leonard said I shouldn't interfere." Miss Marple absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Griselda, you've been extraordinarily helpful. I don't suppose you kept any record of which direction he went when he left?" "As a matter of fact, I did. He headed toward Much Benham. I noted it because I thought perhaps he was staying at the Royal Arms Hotel there. It's the sort of establishment where a gentleman with a Rolls-Royce might lodge." "My dear," Miss Marple said with genuine admiration, "you are wasted on flower arrangements. You should have been a detective." 20 minutes later, Miss Marple was seated in Colonel Melchett's office at the police station, with Dr. Haydock and Inspector Slack in attendance. She had just finished relating what she had learned from Peter Wickham and Griselda Clement. "A Rolls-Royce from London," Melchett mused, jotting notes, "and a signet ring. That should help narrow things down considerably. Slack, can you telephone the Royal Arms and inquire whether they had such a guest in September?" While Slack made the call, Dr. Haydock leaned back in his chair, studying Miss Marple with curious respect. "You're suggesting that this mysterious gentleman might be our killer?" "I'm suggesting that he had a confrontation with Hargreaves 2 months ago, and that Hargreaves subsequently became more cautious and secretive. That implies he knew he was in danger. Yet he continued his blackmail activities, which suggests he believed himself protected somehow." "Protected by what?" Melchett asked. "By evidence, perhaps. A letter, a document, something that would be revealed if anything happened to him. A dead man's switch, as it were." Slack returned, his face animated. "The Royal Arms confirms it. A Mr. Anthony Lansing of Belgravia, London, stayed there September 12th through 14th. Arrived in a Silver Ghost, registration matches. They remember him because he was very particular about his accommodations and tipped generously." "Anthony Lansing?" Melchett repeated. Then his eyebrows shot up. Good Lord! Not Sir Anthony Lancing, the industrialist? The same, according to the hotel manager. Owner of Lancing Steel Works, Member of Parliament for Surrey South, married to the former Lady Philippa Westbrook. Quite a prominent figure. Miss Marple felt a small thrill of recognition. Lady Philippa Westbrook. Wasn't there some scandal involving her family years ago? Something about her younger brother? Dr. Haydock snapped his fingers. Yes, Edward Westbrook. It was just after the war. He was accused of embezzling funds from a military charity, money meant for war widows. The case was dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the whispers never entirely stopped. He died in a hunting accident a few years later. Rather convenient, some said. And Lady Philippa married Sir Anthony Lancing shortly after her brother's death, Miss Marple added quietly. One wonders if Mr. Hargreaves had somehow obtained evidence about the embezzlement, perhaps proof that the accusations were true, or evidence that the hunting accident was not quite so accidental. Melchett frowned. But Hargreaves was a butcher in St. Mary Mead. How would he have access to information about London society scandals? His past, Miss Marple reminded him. Dr. Haydock discovered that Hargreaves once worked as a clerk in a solicitor's office, handling estate matters. The Westbrook family is old nobility. Their legal affairs would have passed through such hands. Perhaps Hargreaves made copies of incriminating documents before he was dismissed. Perhaps he's been sitting on them for years, waiting for the right moment to use them. And 2 months ago, he decided that moment had come. Haydock said grimly, approached Sir Anthony and demanded payment. But would a man like Sir Anthony Lancing commit murder over a decades-old scandal? Slack asked skeptically. He's wealthy, powerful, he could afford to pay. Miss Marple's expression was grave. Inspector, you're thinking like a policeman, rather than like a man of society. For someone like Sir Anthony, reputation is everything. His position in Parliament, his business interests, his wife's place in society, all of it rests on the appearance of respectability. If it became known that Lady Philippa's brother was a thief, or that questions surrounded his death, it would destroy them both. Some things cannot be bought or bargained away. They must be eliminated entirely. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. We need to speak with Sir Anthony, Melchett said finally, but we must tread carefully. A man of his position will have solicitors, connections. We can't simply haul him in for questioning without solid evidence. There's another problem, Miss Marple said softly. Even if Sir Anthony is our killer, how did he know that Cordelia Spence would be at the butcher's shop Wednesday morning? How did he know the perfect time to commit murder when there would be a convenient scapegoat present? That suggests either remarkable luck or inside knowledge. Dr. Haydock whistled low. You're saying he had an accomplice here in the village? I'm saying, Miss Marple replied, that we have not yet uncovered all of Mr. Hargreaves's secrets, and until we do, I fear we cannot see the complete picture of his death. Part 10. The appointment book. Rain had returned to St. Mary Mead, a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the high street into a river of reflections and drove villagers indoors to their fires. Miss Marple sat in Mrs. Bantry's drawing room once more, this time with a small group gathered at Colonel Melchett's request. The Colonel himself, Dr. Haydock, Inspector Slack, and rather surprisingly, Lawrence Blake. Blake looked uncomfortable, his handsome features drawn with tension. I don't understand why I've been summoned here, he said stiffly. I've already told you everything I know. Not quite everything, Mr. Blake, Miss Marple said gently. You see, we've been puzzling over how the killer knew precisely when to strike. Wednesday morning, between 8 and 9, when Cordelia Spence would be present at the shop. That timing was too perfect to be coincidence. What does that have to do with me? Melchett leaned forward. Mr. Blake, when you were being blackmailed by Hargreaves, how did you arrange to pay him? Blake shifted uncomfortably. He would send me notes, brief messages telling me when and where to deliver the money, usually at the shop, after hours, through the back entrance. And these notes, how were they delivered? Pushed through my letterbox, unsigned. I burned them all afterward. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Mr. Blake, I wonder if you would tell us about your background, your family, specifically. His jaw tightened. I've told you already, I'm the younger son of Lord Egerton. What more do you need to know? Your mother, Miss Marple said quietly. She was Lady Egerton, born Philippa Westbrook, was she not? The colour drained from Blake's face. How did you— He stopped himself, then slumped in his chair. Yes, Lady Philippa was my mother. She died 5 years ago. Making Sir Anthony Lancing your stepfather, Dr. Haydock said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Blake nodded miserably. My mother married him when I was 15 after my father died. Anthony was good to us at first, but— He trailed off, his expression haunted. After Mother died, things changed. He became obsessed with protecting the family reputation, with erasing anything that might tarnish the Westbrook name. When I got into trouble with gambling debts, he paid them off but made it clear I was an embarrassment. He sent me here to St. Mary Mead to get me out of London society. And Mr. Hargreaves discovered your connection to Sir Anthony, Miss Marple said. He discovered everything, Blake said bitterly. About my Uncle Edward's embezzlement, about the suspicious circumstances of his death, about my gambling. He threatened to write to Anthony, to expose all of it unless I paid. I was terrified. Not for myself, I was already disgraced, but for my elder brother. He's done nothing wrong, and Anthony's scandal would destroy his political career. Melchett's expression was grim. Did Sir Anthony know you were being blackmailed? I never told him directly, but about 6 weeks ago, he came to visit me here, supposedly to check on my welfare. While he was here, he saw one of Hargreaves's notes. I'd left it on my desk. He was furious when he read it, demanded to know everything. I had no choice but to confess. And what was his reaction? Blake's hands clenched. He was coldly angry. That controlled rage that was always more frightening than shouting. He said he would handle the matter. I thought he meant to pay Hargreaves off, to end the blackmail. I never imagined. His voice broke. Good God, I never imagined he would kill the man. Can you prove Sir Anthony was here on Wednesday morning? Slack demanded. No. He told me he was going to London on business. But he could have stopped here easily enough. It's on the route from his estate in Surrey. Blake looked up, his eyes desperate. But how would he have known about Miss Spence? How would he have known she would be at the shop? Miss Marple rose and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-washed garden. That, Mr. Blake, is the question that has troubled me most, and I believe I finally understand the answer. She turned to face the room. Dr. Haydock, when you examined Mr. Hargreaves's body, you mentioned that his appointment book was missing. What else was missing from the shop? Haydock frowned, thinking. The ledger pages for the recent months had been torn out, as we discovered. But otherwise, wait, there was something odd. The telephone pad by the till. Hargreaves kept one there for customers to jot down orders. It had the top page torn off. I noticed because the edges were ragged, as though someone had removed it hastily. Precisely, Miss Marple said. Someone removed a page that contained information. Information about appointments, perhaps. Melchett sat forward. You're suggesting that Hargreaves wrote down Miss Spence's appointment on that pad? I'm suggesting something rather more significant, Miss Marple said. Hargreaves was a methodical man. When Mrs. Beale provided him with information, how do you suppose he contacted his victims to arrange payment? He couldn't risk being seen meeting them openly, and he couldn't send notes that might be traced back to him. The telephone, Blake said suddenly. He would have called them. Exactly. And like any careful businessman conducting sensitive negotiations, he would have kept notes. Names, times, amounts discussed. All written down on that convenient pad by the telephone, where he could refer to it during conversations. Inspector Slack was nodding eagerly. So, the killer took the pad because it contained evidence of all Hargreaves's current blackmail victims, including himself. More than that, Miss Marple continued, it contained appointments. Hargreaves had arranged for Cordelia Spence to meet him Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock. Anyone who saw that notation would know the perfect time to commit murder, when someone else would be present to take the blame. But who could have seen it? Mrs. Bantry asked, speaking for the first time. The shop was locked at night, wasn't it? It was, Miss Marple agreed. But there was one person who had regular access to the shop at unusual hours. One person whom Hargreaves trusted enough to let in through the back door. One person who had been providing him with secrets for 2 years, and would have had dozens of opportunities to see that telephone pad. Understanding dawned on every face. Mrs. Beale, Melchett breathed. Mrs. Beale, Miss Marple confirmed. She knew about Cordelia's appointment. And I believe she told someone else, someone who paid her handsomely for that particular piece of information. Someone who needed to know exactly when to strike to ensure someone else would be blamed. Sir Anthony, Blake whispered, his face ashen. He used Mrs. Beale just as Hargreaves had. But he was more thorough than my stepfather in planning murder. Miss Marple's expression was deeply troubled. I fear, Mr. Blake, that we must now prove it. And that will require confronting both Sir Anthony Lansing and Mrs. Beale with evidence that neither of them wishes to acknowledge. Part 11. The Trap Springs. The police station's interview room had been transformed into something resembling a drawing room, with comfortable chairs arranged around a small table bearing tea service. Miss Marple had insisted on this arrangement, much to Inspector Slack's vocal displeasure. We're investigating a murder, not hosting a garden party, he'd grumbled. Precisely why we must be civilized about it, Miss Marple had replied. One catches more flies with honey than vinegar, Inspector. Now, as evening shadows lengthened outside, Mrs. Beale sat rigidly in one of the chairs, her face pale and pinched. Across from her, Miss Marple poured tea with the same serene grace she might display at a church social, while Colonel Melchett and Dr. Haydock observed from the corners of the room. I don't understand why I'm here, Mrs. Beale said, her voice tight. I've already told you everything about helping Mr. Hargreaves with his information gathering. Not quite everything, Miss Marple said gently, offering her a cup. Sugar? I always find that sweet tea helps settle the nerves. Now then, Mrs. Beale, you mentioned that you had no contact with Mr. Hargreaves on the morning of his death. Is that correct? That's right. I was home all morning. And yet, Miss Marple continued, her tone remaining pleasant, we have a witness who saw you entering the butcher's shop through the back entrance at approximately 7:30 Wednesday morning, nearly half an hour before Cordelia Spence arrived. The cup rattled violently in Mrs. Beale's hand, tea sloshing into the saucer. That's a lie. Who says they saw me? Multiple witnesses, actually, Melchett said from his corner. though this was something of an exaggeration. Mrs. Beale, I think it's time you told us the complete truth. Mrs. Beale's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't kill him. I swear on my children's lives, I didn't kill him. We believe you, Miss Marple said soothingly, but you were there that morning, and I think you saw something, or someone. A long silence stretched out, broken only by Mrs. Beale's ragged breathing. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a gentleman. He'd been asking questions about Mr. Hargreaves, casual-like, in the village. Said he was interested in buying property here, wanted to know about local tradesmen. He seemed nice, respectable. But then he approached me directly about a week ago. Said he knew I'd been helping Mr. Hargreaves, and that he needed some information. What sort of information? Melchett asked. He wanted to know who Mr. Hargreaves was meeting with, what days, what times. Said he was trying to help someone being blackmailed, wanted to catch Hargreaves in the act. He offered me £50, just to tell him what I knew. I was desperate, with my husband drinking and my daughter's children to help feed. So I told him about Miss Spence's appointment Wednesday morning. And this gentleman, Miss Marple said carefully, did he give you his name? Called himself Mr. Thompson, but I'm not daft. I knew it wasn't his real name. He had that London polish, spoke like gentry, and his hands? She shuddered. I noticed them particularly. Soft hands with a gold signet ring, like the hands of someone who'd never done an honest day's work in his life. Dr. Haydock and Melchett exchanged significant glances. Sir Anthony Lancing. What happened Wednesday morning? Miss Marple prompted. Mrs. Beale twisted her apron between her hands. He told me to go to the shop at 7:30 and make sure the back door was unlocked. Said he needed to have a private word with Hargreaves before Miss Spence arrived. I didn't want to do it, but he gave me £25 in advance, more money than I'd seen in months. So I went there early, let myself in with the key I'd had made when I used to clean the shop. The place was empty. I unlocked the back door like he asked, then left through the front. You didn't see Mr. Hargreaves? No, the shop was dark, quiet. I assumed he was upstairs in his rooms, getting ready to open. But he was already dead, Dr. Haydock said grimly. Killed sometime between 6:30 and 7:30, according to my examination, which means the killer was either already in the shop when you arrived, or came in shortly after you left. Mrs. Beale's face went even whiter. You think this Mr. Thompson killed him? That I helped a murderer? I think, Miss Marple said, that you were used, Mrs. Beale, just as you used the people you spied on. But unlike them, you were given the opportunity to assist a killer without ever knowing what you were doing. A sharp knock interrupted them. Sergeant Brick entered, his face flushed with excitement. Colonel, Sir Anthony Lancing has just arrived in the village. He's at the Royal Arms, demanding to see Mr. Blake. Says it's urgent family business. Melchett stood immediately. Perfect timing. Slack. Go to the Royal Arms with Sergeant Brick. Don't arrest Sir Anthony yet, but keep him there. Tell him we need his assistance with our investigation, and that we'll be along shortly. As Slack departed, Melchett turned to Mrs. Beale. You're going to help us, Mrs. Beale. You're going to face Sir Anthony Lancing and identify him as the man who paid you to unlock that door. But he'll deny it. It'll be my word against his, and who'll believe a cleaning woman over a knight of the realm? That's where you're wrong, Miss Marple said quietly. She opened her handbag and withdrew a small object wrapped in tissue paper. Mrs. Beale, You mentioned that this gentleman had soft hands with a gold signet ring. Did you notice anything particular about the ring? It had a crest on it. A bird of some kind, an eagle, I think, and some motto in Latin. Miss Marple unwrapped the tissue paper, revealing a button. This was found in the butcher's shop, lodged beneath the counter near where Mr. Hargreaves's body lay. It's a rather distinctive button, gold with an engraved crest. The same crest, I believe, that appears on Sir Anthony Lancing's signet ring, the Westbrook family crest. Dr. Haydock examined the button closely. It's been torn from a garment, probably during a struggle. Sir Anthony was wearing a waistcoat when he visited me, Lawrence Blake said from the doorway, where he had been listening. I remember because I admired it. Savile Row tailoring, very distinctive buttons. He was quite proud of having his family crest incorporated into everything he wore. Melchert's expression was grim with satisfaction. Then we have our evidence. Mrs. Beale's testimony places him in contact with Hargreaves's accomplice. The button places him at the scene of the crime, and Mr. Blake can testify to his knowledge of the blackmail and his promise to handle the matter. It's circumstantial, Miss Marple cautioned, but circumstantial evidence can be compelling when woven together properly. The question is whether Sir Anthony will maintain his innocence in the face of it, or whether his pride, the very pride that drove him to murder, will betray him when confronted. There's only one way to find out, Melchert said, reaching for his hat. Shall we go and have a conversation with a murderer? Part 12. Justice Served. The Royal Arms Hotel's private lounge was an elegant space of dark panelling and leather chairs, where the firelight cast dancing shadows across Persian carpets. Sir Anthony Lancing stood by the mantelpiece, his imposing figure radiating authority even in these provincial surroundings. He was a man accustomed to deference, to having his commands obeyed without question. That certainty was about to be shattered. Colonel Melchert entered first, followed by Miss Marple, Dr. Haydock, and finally Lawrence Blake, whose presence made Sir Anthony's eyes narrow with displeasure. Lawrence, I told you to wait at Rose Cottage. This doesn't concern you. On the contrary, Blake said quietly, it concerns me greatly. You used my situation to justify murder. Sir Anthony's face darkened. I haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about. Colonel Melchert, I came here to discuss family matters with my stepson. I don't appreciate being summoned like some common criminal. Then you won't mind answering a few questions about the death of Edmund Hargreaves, Melchert replied evenly. The butcher? I read about it in the Times. Tragic, I'm sure. But what has it to do with me? Miss Marple stepped forward, her mild blue eyes remarkably steady as they met his. Sir Anthony, you visited St. Mary Mead in September. You had a rather heated conversation with Mr. Hargreaves in his shop. Would you care to tell us what that conversation concerned? A flicker of something, surprise, alarm, crossed his features before his expression hardened into aristocratic disdain. I don't recall any such visit. Witnesses place you here, Melchert said. Your motor car was registered. The hotel has records of your stay. I may have passed through on business. If I stopped at a butcher's shop, it would have been to purchase meat. Nothing more sinister than that. Witnesses also heard you arguing, Dr. Haydock added. They heard Mr. Hargreaves threatening to expose secrets about your family. The Westbrook family scandal, specifically. Sir Anthony's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. Village gossip, utterly unreliable. Then perhaps you can explain this. Miss Marple produced the button, holding it up to the firelight. This was found at the murder scene. It bears the Westbrook family crest, the same crest you wear on your signet ring, The same crest embroidered on your waistcoat buttons. For the first time, genuine unease flickered across Sir Anthony's face. His hand moved unconsciously to his waistcoat, where one button was indeed missing. That could have come from anywhere. My family crest is not unique to my clothing, but it is unique in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple said gently, and it was found beneath Mr. Hargreaves's body, suggesting it was torn off during a struggle that ended with his skull being crushed by a blow from behind. This is preposterous. I demand to speak with my solicitor. By all means, Melchett said. But first, I think you should know that we have a witness who can place you at the butcher's shop on Wednesday morning. A witness who unlocked the back door for you, as you requested. Sir Anthony's composure was cracking now, his face flushing red. What witness? Some village busybody with an overactive imagination? Mrs. Beale, Blake said quietly, your accomplice. The woman you paid to spy on Hargreaves's schedule and unlock the door so you could kill him. Lies! The word of a domestic servant against mine. Miss Marple shook her head sadly. Not just her word, Sir Anthony. There's the button, the witness testimonies, the hotel records. But more than that, there's the pattern of behavior. You discovered that Mr. Hargreaves was blackmailing your stepson. You couldn't allow that, not because you cared about Lawrence, but because any investigation into the blackmail might uncover the truth about your brother-in-law's embezzlement and suspicious death. Your political career, your reputation, everything you've built would collapse. So you decided to eliminate the threat, Dr. Haydock continued. You contacted Mrs. Beale, whom you'd learned was Hargreaves's informant. You paid her to tell you when Hargreaves would be meeting with his victims. You specifically chose a time when Cordelia Spence would be present, someone with their own desperate motive. The perfect scapegoat. Sir Anthony's hands clenched into fists. You have no proof of any of this. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, we do. Inspector Slack entered, accompanied by 2 constables and a well-dressed man carrying a leather case. Sir Anthony, this is Mr. Pemberton, your tailor from Savile Row. He's confirmed that the button found at the murder scene came from a waistcoat he made specifically for you 3 months ago. One of only 2 such waistcoats in existence, both in your possession. The other is currently in your London residence, missing a button in exactly the same position. Sir Anthony stared at the tailor, who looked acutely uncomfortable. Pemberton, how dare you? I dare, because murder is murder, Sir Anthony, the tailor said quietly. No amount of money or position changes that. The silence that followed was absolute. Sir Anthony stood frozen, the weight of evidence crushing down upon him. His face cycled through emotions, fury, fear, calculation, before finally settling into something like resignation. He was going to destroy everything, Sir Anthony said finally, his voice hollow. 25 years of building my career, my reputation. One village butcher with evidence of my brother-in-law's crimes was going to tear it all down. He wanted £10,000, 10,000, as though I were some merchant to be bled dry. I couldn't allow it. I wouldn't. So you killed him, Melchett said. I eliminated a problem. That's what men of action do. We solve problems. I waited until the Spence woman arrived, heard her enter through the front. Then I went in through the back door Mrs. Beale had so helpfully unlocked. Hargreaves was standing at his counter, preparing his knives. Picked up a mallet from his workbench and struck him once. It was over in seconds. Then I took his appointment book and the telephone pad, locked the back door behind me, and left. Leaving Miss Spence to be blamed, Blake said, his voice thick with disgust. Sir Anthony shrugged. She would have confessed to protect some secret of her own. People are predictable that way. Their weaknesses make them useful. Sir Anthony Lancing, Melchett said formally, I am arresting you for the murder of Edmund Hargreaves. Inspector Slack, take him into custody. As the constables moved forward, Sir Anthony looked directly at Lawrence Blake. This is your fault. If you'd had the decency to keep your troubles private, none of this would have been necessary. Blake met his gaze steadily. No, Anthony, this is your fault. You chose murder over honor, and now you'll pay the price. 3 days later, Miss Marple sat in her garden, the afternoon sun warming her face as she worked on her knitting. The village had slowly returned to its usual rhythms, though the scandal would provide conversation for years to come. Cordelia Spence had been released, her sister's remains given a proper burial in the churchyard, with a service that the entire village attended. The shame Cordelia had feared never materialized. Instead, St. Mary Mead had rallied around her with surprising compassion. Mrs. Beale had been charged as an accessory, though Miss Marple suspected she would receive a lenient sentence given her cooperation. Sometimes, Miss Marple reflected, people did terrible things not from evil, but from desperation and weakness. Aunt Jane, she looked up to find Raymond West approaching with Joan. My dear boy, how lovely. Do sit down. I've just heard from Colonel Melchett. Sir Anthony has confessed to everything. His solicitors are trying to arrange some sort of plea, but it looks like he'll hang. Miss Marple's needles continued their steady rhythm. Murder is murder, regardless of one's station. Mr. Hargreaves was a dreadful man, but Sir Anthony had no right to take his life. You solved it brilliantly, Joan said admiringly. How did you know it was Sir Anthony? I didn't, not at first, but the pattern became clear once I understood that blackmailers are rather like spiders. They sit in the center of their web collecting information from many sources. When Hargreaves was killed so precisely, at the exact moment when someone else could be blamed, I knew the killer must have had inside information. That meant an accomplice. And Mrs. Beale was the obvious connection. She set down her knitting and gazed across her garden, where roses bloomed in cheerful profusion. Human nature, my dear, is remarkably consistent. Pride, fear, desperation, these are the forces that drive people to extraordinary acts, both noble and terrible. One simply has to observe carefully and remember that people are, in essence, very much alike everywhere. Raymond smiled. And that's what makes you such a formidable detective. Oh, I'm not a detective, Miss Marple said mildly. I'm simply an old woman who pays attention. Now then, who would like some tea? And perhaps you could tell me about that new book you're writing, Raymond. I do so enjoy hearing about your work. As they settled into comfortable conversation, the shadows lengthened across St. Mary Mead, and life continued its eternal rhythm in the small English village where, for a brief and terrible moment, murder had disturbed the peace. But justice, Miss Marple reflected with quiet satisfaction, had been served. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered.